Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Emerging Feminine podcast. My name's Sameena and I'm the founder of Awaken the Goddess Festival. And I'm here with Cathy, who spoke at Awaken the Goddess a couple of years ago. And before the festival, we actually had a video interview where I was finding out a little bit more about her and the work that she does. And I was really impressed by the way she spoke about the feminine and lots of issues that I care quite passionately about. And I thought she was so eloquent in the way that she spoke. And I remember saying to her, "Oh, Cathy, you should really do a podcast." And we laughed about the idea, and here we are 2 years later actually doing one together. So I'm really excited about this new venture, and I'll move over to Cathy so that she can introduce herself.
Okay, thank you, Sameena. Hello, everybody. My name's Cathy Rowan. I'm a leadership coach and spiritual mentor for women. And I also have a really strong background in feminine spiritual practices. And what I mean by feminine is practices that suit women's bodies and mind, and practices and traditions which honor the feminine. Because we live in a patriarchal society now and have lived in a patriarchal culture for a few thousand years in our history, and therefore a lot of the practices that that remain in existence are often, more angled towards men and suited to men, because there were many times in the past where women were denied access to spiritual practices, and the women's practices sort of went underground into hiding. So it's been my interest to find traditions and teachers who've known something about these ancient practices and have been restoring them and teaching them to women. And as Sameena said, that's the context in which she and I met: an interest in the feminine, an interest in looking into the practices and traditions that honor and respect women, and looking at it as well from a context of women's leadership. How does this help women's lives, and how does it help women to make the contributions that they're here to make, to live their purpose, etc.
So we're going to be talking today a little bit about what the emerging feminine means to both of us. So what does it mean to you, Cathy?
Well, I think to me, it's bit as we were saying, we've been in under patriarchal culture for a long time, and then in the last 100 years or so, there has been a big step towards women's liberation and equal rights between women and men, and a lot has been accomplished. It's only 100 years since women got the vote in the UK, and only then it was only some women. Actually, women's voting rights weren't equalised with men until 1929 in the UK. And it's only sort of since 1975 that there's been equal opportunities legislation giving women equal rights to jobs with men in the workplace. And of course, even though that legislation has been there, I think we all know it's taken a lot longer, and there's still a big view that, or I think even more than view, I think it's research fact that women's earnings still lag behind men. So there's still improvements to be made, but where I'm sort of focusing on, where I'm using the term emerging feminine, is that to date, the equality movement has been about equality within the existing patriarchal paradigm. And as more more women step forward into leadership, and the point about the feminine is not just about women. I believe that patriarchal society in a number of ways doesn't do men any favors either. It gives them many advantages, But as a result of suppression of the feminine, both women and men have inner feminine and inner masculine capacities. So when you suppress the feminine, you suppress the development of the inner feminine in men, as well as the development of the inner feminine in women. So masculine qualities get heightened in both sexes. So I think when we talk about the emerging feminine, we're talking about no longer just a movement about equality in the patriarchal paradigm. I think we're actually talking about a change of paradigm to where masculine and feminine are honored equally, which should have beneficial results for both women and men.
Yeah, it's so true. I remember it was you're saying it's sort of in the 70s, the whole Equality Act in the workplace and everything came out. But just a couple of years ago, I was staying at my uncle's house, and we were talking, and he was vehemently talking about how women expect to be able to go and get these top jobs and have a family at the same time, and they expect to be given these jobs over men. And I'm not very good at articulating myself when I get hot and bothered over something. In fact, in general, over things that I feel quite passionate about, I feel it in my heart and in my gut, rather than at an intellectual level where I can talk about it, which is why I actually admire you quite a lot, because you're very good at speaking and talking about these issues. And I was trying to get across the sort of fact that just because it's women that bear the children, it does not mean that they should be at a disadvantage or that they should be disabled by the way patriarchal society is set up. And it is because we live in patriarchy that women are not able to advance as much under certain types of, so for example, very often if you go to work to a job interview in the public sector, there's a lot less of it. But if you go in a private company and you're heavily pregnant, you're very unlikely to get a job, and things like this. So I'm thinking to myself, he's grown up. He's seen the whole feminist movement. He can witness all the conversations that happen today, the advancements, the fact that, women are not, women were not considered to be as intelligent as men some years ago. All these things have changed, but he's still stuck in the fact that, oh no, because you have children and you have a family, how can you even dare to think that you can be in the workplace and be at high level jobs, do high level jobs and expect to advance the same as men can? And I was just like mortified. So to me, the emerging feminine is sort of the conversations that we have, that people can listen to, can form ideas about, can argue against if they wish, but everyone's having them. Like, it's everywhere. The fact that like Bristol has become like a period friendly city. I don't know if it's quite a new thing that's happening, where they're doing workshops and things in the workplace to make it period friendly and to address period poverty. There are things happening, all these sort of the divine feminine coming into it, sort of like patriarchal religions maybe being pushed back a little bit, while sort of pagan religions that are much more feminine oriented and they worship the goddess a lot more, coming into vogue quite a lot, and I'm thinking, well, this is great. It's not quick enough for me. I don't know how you feel, but it's happening. There's like a shift happening. Everyone says it, and I sometimes I think, oh, everyone's saying it, is it true? I'm a skeptic at heart.
Yeah,
but I think, well, actually no, it is.
it is.
It's true.
A few things to say on those points, actually, because you made some really interesting points. The first thing is, it is very true. There is change. There is this feeling that the feminine is emerging, the feminine is rising, as you mentioned, a big interest in among many women in the goddess, and among men too, actually, among some men too, in the goddess, in the older religions, less interest in the sort of like the patriarchal religions. So there's all of that. There's a sense of something that has been bubbling away under the surface, now bursting forwards. And I'm sure that, you know, changing attitudes over the last, over time, particularly over the last 100 years, as laws have changed as well, has helped that. But, you know, what I would say when you mentioned about, sorry, was it your uncle?
Mm.
Mentioned. Yeah, I mean, there's the one thing for laws to change, and there's the other thing about beliefs changing, because we all know that our beliefs are formed, you know, often quite early on in life, and unless we actually address those beliefs, they don't necessarily change. So the laws can change, but if we've got a conflicting belief, that's the issue, and that will certainly be the issue, I think, in the workplace, as to why, you know, there have been laws around for quite a few decades now, and yet the change has come more slowly, because you've got to, you know, people have got to be willing to address their beliefs. There is, I think it's Thomas Kuhn, Kuhn, who wrote about paradigm change, and his view is the upholders of the old paradigm die out. Which is sort of true. Eventually, the upholders of the old paradigm die out because not everybody's going to do that work on their beliefs. You know, a lot of women are doing that work, I think, on their beliefs, because the beliefs that they grew up with, that they were introduced to when they were younger, don't sit well with what they know themselves to be. So we have to do the belief work around sort of claiming our value, claiming our power, things like that. There's, you know, this coaching work, personal development work. If you go to any workshops, you'll find mostly a lot more women there than men. So it does look as though women are sort of leading the way with that sort of work. And I do tend to think that's most likely because women feel less comfortable in patriarchy than men do. As I say, I personally don't think it does men any favors either. Well, it gives them favors in terms of position, but there are negatives with regard to their relationships, their emotional development, you know, other things that they might actually want for themselves, but may not actually connect that
Yeah.
support. So just one more thing I want to say on that. So as I see it, you know, like we talk about the glass ceiling in organizations, and the bit about women having to break the glass ceiling to get into the top jobs. And I actually think that patriarchy is, there is that glass ceiling in organizations, and that's what people have been trying to break. But I think now there's even a more hidden glass ceiling that people have not been aware of, which is patriarchy itself. Because often we want to have change and transformation within a paradigm, but there's a limit to that. So there comes a point where we have to work for the change of the paradigm. And I like the bit that you'd said about, well, the change isn't coming fast enough for you. Well, the thing is, collective and culturally, you know, if we look over history, it's rare that you can, you know, you might not get to see the change you'd like to see in your lifetime in the collective. But what you can do is work with yourself and change those inner beliefs so that you yourself break free from the binds of patriarchy. That can be done more quickly.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah. It's interesting, you know, the thing you were saying about men maybe not going to these personal development workshops and things like that. That is a result of patriarchy too, because, you know, men are, you know, from a very young age, they're taught to sort of squash their feelings down. You know, you fall and you scrape your knee and you're crying, and it's like, oh, come on, be a big boy. Big boys don't cry and stuff like that. You know, there's like this indoctrination by patriarchy that women repeat as well, because they've seen it from, you know, you see it everywhere. You see it in films, you see your parents do it to your brothers or whatever, you know, and it's just like, oh, come on, be a big boy, be a big boy. But you don't realize what those words mean when you're actually saying them to a child, and what message is being absorbed, you know. And this sort of idea, which is why, you know, possibly men commit suicide more than women, that there's a repression of emotions, and this whole sort of touchy-feely thing about wanting to develop yourself as a person, rather than just the ambitious, let's climb the career ladder, or let's achieve this, or let's get these goals, is maybe not, which is one of the sort of things that you're saying, that patriarchy doesn't do men any favors, you know, and that's another way how it doesn't do us favors, because men don't grow because patriarchy teaches them not to grow spiritually and personally.
Exactly. And I think that that really the place that shows up the most painfully is in our relationships. I mean, we talked about the workplace, but I think it really shows up painfully in our relationships. And I think, you know, there's so many women, you know, when I talk to women, a big complaint is, you know, it's hard to find a conscious, emotionally mature man. And they are around. It's not true that they're not around, but I do think it is true that there may not be as many of them around as women. However, you know, I've also sort of in some of the spiritual circles I've hung around in the past, there was one where there actually, which did attract quite a lot of men, and because it was martial arts based actually, and it attracted a lot of men. But there was also in that training, there was some training in tantric practices, and in talking to the men in those sort of workshops, a lot of them would come in, particularly young men would come in, and they'd say things like, "Oh, I've come because I want to learn to be a better lover." And they were so sweet about it. And I thought, you know, oh, that's, you know, that yearning is there.
Mm.
That yearning is there to be in a good relationship, you know, whether you're a man or whether you're a woman and whatever your sexual preference is. I think there's that yearning for that. And I personally think a lot of that yearning, when women are saying they want a conscious man, they're really saying, you know, I want an experience of the divine masculine. And when the men are saying, you know, they want to be a good lover, they want to be in a relationship with a, you know, a sexy woman, and they're seeking the divine feminine, and you know, they're seeking the pure qualities of the feminine, and the women are seeking the pure qualities of the masculine, and we're looking for them in, you know, other mortal beings and not finding. And of course, the spiritual teachers will actually say, well, that's the wrong place to look. You know, you need to be doing your spiritual practice. You need to discover those qualities in yourself. You know, you need to discover the divine through an experience of spiritual awakening, and then bring that back into your relationships. You know, but don't try to get another person to be your other half. You know, do the work to be complete yourself, and then meet another person from that perspective. And so yeah, I do think that's important. But you know, it's true that our relationships can lead us to that quest for the feminine, because I also know and speak to women, both my own clients and in groups that I belong to, and a lot of women at the current time think that maybe they've become too masculine, either because, you know, those are the qualities that are educated into us, you know, to be goal oriented, you know, to be competent, responsible. These are all good things. But what some women are saying is they bring their qualities that they know make them successful in the workplace, they bring them home with them, and then they know that their husband doesn't want to be in bed with another man. You know, if they have those qualities, they're like being another man. And it's like, how do they then make that switch if they haven't really developed into the feminine qualities, and we don't have the role models that tell us what that is? So I think there are a lot of women really conscious of wanting to make that journey, and they want their, assuming a heterosexual relationship, they want their men to be a man. They don't want to be the man and the man to be the woman. Well, maybe a few people that works for, but reverse relationships don't work for everyone. And the majority of people, yeah, the women want to develop their feminine side.
Yeah. You know, 100% agree with you about that, because, you know, in order to excel, a lot of women have had to do it like a man, you know, in career, I mean, you know, not necessarily at home. And it's this sort of idea that in order to get somewhere, you need to act in a way that's completely not in line with your cyclical flow and your very essence, which is, I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that, and funnily enough, no, I'm saying a lot of people, it's people in our circles are waking up to that. I find sometimes when I have conversations with other people who are not in the circle at all, I'm just completely, my mind is blown by, oh my God, you don't even know how your periods affect you. You know, there's a very close friend of mine actually who we work together as well. And whenever I talk about, oh, I'm on my period, so I can't do X at work, like make a decision or do something that, you know, involves a lot of detailed work, she look at me like I'm bonkers. She's like, oh, it's all about your period for you, is it? And I look at her thinking, how can you not know? You know, like our hormones, like we've got this massive superpower that we can tap into, that will do us so much service in our lives. But so many women don't actually know about that. But, you know, it's why that sort of the work that you do in feminine leadership and stuff is so important, because teaching women, or sort of not even teaching, but, you know, reawakening a sort of innate forgotten wisdom in women is so important, because we don't have, as you said before, we don't have those positive role models, you know, of women who are doing it completely the feminine way. You know, they can honor their cycle, they can honor their flow, they can move work commitments around. If you're self-employed and you've got understanding people around you and stuff, you can do that. But very often at work, you can't reschedule a meeting that 12 people are coming to because and just say, well, actually, you know, I'm probably going to be on my period, that'll be the first day of my period, not the best day for a meeting. You know, you still can't do that in the normal workplace. And I think until we get to that point, more and more women have to be woken up to a feminine style of leadership in order for us to get to that point where it is acceptable to go into work and say that and do that.
You're right. I mean, there is a reawakening and education involved, because although, you know, you might say, okay, well, these things are innate for women, it's still like, it's like a muscle that hasn't been developed.
Yeah.
You know, there's got to be a reawakening. And you're also right. You know, there are many women's groups, particularly in, you know, the personal development world and in my world, in the coaching world, you know, that these things are talked about, and you can find all the information on the internet, but still, it's still probably the minority of women. There's a sort of like a leading edge group, if you like, that have awakened to these things and have taken the time to research them and look into them. And as you know, as we start to alter our lives in accord with those natural rhythms and principles, and think, oh my goodness, you know, there's this whole world has opened up that I didn't even know was there. And then it's sort of like the chasm gets wider between what might be and the existing sort of patriarchal system and the way we've been grown and developed. And as we realize how much has been suppressed, and how much we've sort of cut our own wisdom and intuition off as a result, we can start to become very enthusiastic that everybody ought to have this information. And of course, you know, it would be lovely, and people awaken to it in their own time, often when something goes wrong in their life. So I know for me, when I first started looking into it, I was into the women's information sort of well, in my 20s, I had a few years of illness, which actually started when I'd been taking the pill, and then I started getting a lot of episodes of vaginal thrush, and it became chronic. And so then I was on a big search of how to solve this, because all the doctors would do would give me a different type of pessary or something like that, and I become resistant to that. And in the days before the internet, I then was sort of going into esoteric bookshops to look for information and contacting naturopaths and homeopaths and any alternative doctors who might know something about this. And eventually I realized that I had a chronic candida infestation. It wasn't just local, it had morphed, and it had infected more of my body's system. So I actually had, you know, several years of trying to clear that, mostly and that turned me on to sort of natural medicine, which operates from a totally different premise than, conventional Western medicine. And that, from there, I got into studying macrobiotics, and that into Taoist philosophy with yin and yang. And so once you get into the yin and the yang and the idea of two poles, and masculine and feminine, well, that was starting to turn my world upside down a bit. And then I sort of burned out at work. I was working in management consulting, and I burned out. And it wasn't just work, it was probably also the relationship I was in at the time. But I was, at that point in my life, not so good at saying no and laying boundaries. And I was trying to be superwoman at home and at work. And so it was those sorts of things which sort of led me into my search. And I think that's the same for, a lot of people, both women and men. Something goes wrong in your life, when you've had visions of, you've had your plan for your life when you've been younger, and things start not going according to plan. And it's like, wait a minute, the world isn't quite like I thought it was. And you have to find a whole new mode of new modus operandi. I think that's the word I was looking for your life. So that happened to me. Clearly, it doesn't happen to everybody. Clearly, the prevailing system works for a lot of people, and if it does, then that's fine. Some of us it doesn't. Maybe because we're more sensitive or more finely tuned than others. I do think that's the case. It might be a personality thing.
But I think it's also following your curiosity as well. So, something happened that led you to that, and that led you to that, that led you to that. It's a journey that you take. I don't know if you've read Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic. She talks about that. It's all about creativity. And she talks about that sort of element of following your curiosity for something, because it might lead to something completely different. So perhaps if you hadn't had the constant bouts of thrush, you wouldn't have started researching alternative medicine. You wouldn't be doing feminine leadership now and changing the world.
I also wouldn't have got all the points that you were making before about periods, because one of the things, of course, that the pill does is it's artificial, so it tunes us out of the natural rhythms of the moon and things like that. So once I started understanding all that, it was okay. Forget the pill. Why did I even take it in the first place? I wish I never had, and I'm certainly never taking it again, because I want to be in tune with the natural cycles.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's still very popular with many women, and for good reason. It's very effective for many women. And so if you're one of the people who doesn't have a body which reacts like mine does to things, then you don't necessarily have a reason to question it.
Yeah, but I think also there's not enough education out there about the pill and what hormonal contraceptive does do to your body, and the long-term permanent effects that it can have. I mean, I don't know enough about it to speak knowledgeably right now, but there's loads of stats I could bring out. But one thing that I find really interesting is the fact that when they started developing a hormonal contraceptive that men could take, a pill that men could take, they abandoned it at trials because of side effects like depression and obesity and headaches, all stuff that the feminine pill, the hormonal contraceptive for women, causes, and more. Permanent changes in your libido, reduction of libido permanently, even when you come off it, is also a side effect, which you don't get told about when you go for the pill. You've got problem periods, they don't investigate, they'll put you on the pill to stop. Well, you get like a fake period when you're on the pill, right? And I just think that it's just it works for people. It's a very easy way of being able to have sex with your partner without worrying about getting pregnant. But and like when I took it, I used like the contraceptive patch, and then I got the the implant that you have in, until I started finding out what it does. I read Code Red by Lisa Lister, and then that woke me up a bit, and I started doing a little bit more research, and I thought, oh my God, I'm not taking this stuff. And I did know a little bit about the side effects and everything like that even before that, but I thought, well, no, it's just a convenience. I really don't want to use condoms. It's more convenient, you kind of, because your health or the adverse effects that it can have on your health is not right there at the forefront. You kind of brush it under the carpet as something that won't affect you. I think if more people knew, though, that the actual effects on your health, on your hormonal cycle, on just your being as a woman, there would be a difference, you know, in how many people actually want to use it. I was completely converted to not using it once I knew a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's not my specialist topic either, but I mean, all the information is on the internet for people who are research minded and want to dig. I mean, one thing about the world we live in at the moment is we have amazing access to information.
Yeah.
However, again, it's, you know, in the prevailing culture, you know, I think, you know, probably the majority of people do look to mainstream information and want to trust the information that's given out by the mainstream, and they're not necessarily wired to look further, and there's nothing wrong with that. I presume this is just individual differences between people, but it does say something about the culture. You know, and I've been saying the patriarchal system, and I'm not even sure who developed the pill. Was it men that developed it? Some scientists? I don't know. I don't know. That would be interesting to know. If anybody knows about that, that would be interesting. Yeah, and it's not either our specialist topic, so maybe one that we should move on from. But yeah, it isn't. I think where I was going with it is just this point about, you know, the prevailing culture has so much influence on our choices and how we live our lives, you know, and yeah. But I feel sure that if we were in a culture that honored all things feminine, that we would have had some better solutions for contraception that actually were not so damaging for women's bodies, did not have consequences that you know, that some of the options that we have do. And it's not only women. When we've been talking about the feminine in the context of women and men, but I also think, I mean, we're living in a world, and there's a lot of focus at the moment on the environment and climate change.
Yeah.
And you know, this is a result of technology and the earth being plundered, you know, rainforests being cut down. Various things have contributed to the climate crisis. But again, I sort of tend to think that if all things feminine, which include the earth and life, all of life, and the knowing that all forms of life are interdependent, that if this was a basic principle upon which society operated, that we wouldn't be in the position that we're in now. We'd be putting at our priority things that kept the earth in balance, and the knowledge that all forms of life are actually dependent on each other. We wouldn't be out down there, you know, cutting down vast numbers of trees or eradicating different species of animals through overhunting or overfishing or things like that. So this is another reason why maybe, you know, a new paradigm is actually vital, and it may be one of the things that pushes through the change of paradigm, because nobody's going to be out there saying, okay, we're going to change the paradigm, patriarchy is no longer going to exist, we're going to have something more feminine. Nobody's going to say that. It's going to be a bottom up transformation from people doing their own work and advocating for change.
Yeah. You're so right about people doing their own work, because sometimes, you know, it can feel really overwhelming, like you can't make a difference individually. So, you know, rainforests are being cut down, the planet is being destroyed. As an individual, what can you do? You recycling, or you not wasting energy, and you not driving your car all the time. You know, what impact is that going to make when everyone else isn't changing what they're doing? But if everyone takes the view that, well, I as an individual have to do the work that I can do to contribute towards this. If everyone did that, it would make such a big difference, you know. And this idea of the whole feminine paradigm coming back into balance, this sort of patriarchy kind of takes and doesn't replenish and doesn't give back, whereas the feminine, it does have that, you know. It's just like the sort of the cycle of, you know, you take, you receive, you take, you receive, you're energetic, you need time to replenish. And it's the same with the planet, you know. Yes, you take something from the planet, but you give something back, and at the moment we're just not doing that. And you know, you've got a lot of people fighting, and you know, Extinction Rebellion and stuff, the people who are doing that sort of work, it's just phenomenal. And they're not doing it from, oh, let's reestablish the feminine on earth, but that is actually what's happening, you know. People are fighting and saying, yeah, we can't keep doing this. And
yeah, there's a lot. One thing that I think is relevant there that I would like to say is, you know, another of my views, and I don't think it's a personal view, I think there are a number of people that say this sort of thing, is that the suppression of the feminine, so I'm going to move sideways because the sun is right in my face. The suppression of the feminine results in a sort of like a feminine wound. We live in a wounded feminine culture, and that quite often our actions come from a wounded place, you know, our anger, etc. And sometimes that's not always the best place to come from, because we move into conflict, and then people sort of start to think, oh, well, instead of patriarchy, we want matriarchy. We want the opposite. You know, it's like female dominant as opposed to male dominant. No, we don't want the dominance at all.
yeah.
We want an equal. We want to value the masculine and value the feminine. That's the only healthy relationship between the two things. And really that's only going to come as each of us, in addition to any outer action that we take, that we each heal the inner wounds and beliefs that we've sustained, you know, in our own lives, and so that we can shift from not only sort of reacting from a wounded place, but to really come from a place of purpose and compassion. So that's well, I just wanted to say that because I know that, you know, some of the demonstrations and have been really peaceful and very respectful, and there are others which sometimes do cause some damage, or are not that respectful to
Really? Okay.
people, wouldn't you say?
I don't, well, specifically I mentioned Extinction Rebellion, but I have friends who have been part of it, and what they say, they do a lot of work. I'm doing a herbal course, and there are a few women who are quite active with Extinction Rebellion, and she said they sort of tell me about, it's a very sort of respectful, peaceful movement. So there's no alcohol allowed, there's no drugs allowed, there's nothing like that, because, you know, obviously you've got loads and loads of people convening for large amounts of time, it can get out of hand, but they're very disciplined with saying that, no, this is a respectful thing. So I mean, I'm not aware of other stuff, but you're right, you know, as soon as when humans do get involved, like the mob mentality can take over, and it can,
tendency I was speaking to, I can't give an actual example, but it's really interesting that you say that Extinction Rebellion have you know, in their ethos have actually thought about that and actually put measures in there to stop it.
yeah. So I mean, we've touched on a lot of things today, and I might be putting you a little bit on the spot here, but you know, you were talking about the fact that we need to do, there are outward things that we do, but there are things that we need to do, inner things as well, about healing and stuff. And I was actually having a think today about, you know, there's a lot of people run towards things thinking that's going to be the magic pill that will you know, because you hear so many stories, you know, self-help books where someone will say, oh, X happened and it completely changed my life, whereas I think actually it's a constant, this healing that you do, it's constant work, it's lifelong work. It's not something, a workshop you go to or a course you do once and then it's over. You learn some tools that you then have to implement over and over and over again in order to constantly evolve and develop. Would you say that that's true as well?
So yeah, I'm very much down that route. I don't.
Yeah. Do you have any? This is why I'm saying might be putting you on the spot. But do you have any, like, what's your favorite technique or your favorite tool for like healing a wound, or does it depend? Because like I do this violet flame thing sometimes, which I learned on a course I did a few years ago. What do you do?
I have several things. I've been different favorite things over time because of different things that I've done. I mean, for a long time, over more than 10 years now, I've been studying with a teacher from a traditional indigenous Indian tantric system, which is feminine. And I do those practices. Many of them have been aimed towards healing and as well as awakening. And they are practices, the different deities which represent different aspects of the cosmos and different internal functions. So some of those practices are really healing. Another thing that I have used a lot in recent years, which I think is very good, particularly if somebody might have the same energetic patterns as somebody like me. I had been in a couple of relationships in the past with people that had been quite controlling, and the relationships had gone quite toxic. Now on the internet these days, this is usually referred to as narcissistic abuse. And there's a woman called Melanie Tonia Evans who has a narcissistic abuse recovery program. It's a recorded program, and she's also got some recordings for masculine and feminine family of origin wounds. I have used her recordings a lot. They're very reasonable cost, and I think if anybody's looking for anything that's reasonable cost and to really address their patterns, I can certainly recommend those. I myself don't have anything produced like that, but yeah, there are things that I teach, but particularly I've gained a lot from both the Taoist tradition, universal Tao practices, and the tantric practices, both of which systems contain emotional transformation practices. And I do sort of teach some of those practices to my clients. Also through my coaching certifications, there are tools that I use there with clients. One tool that I really like is called Radical Releasing. It works with beliefs and points of view, and it sort of neutralizes the energetic charge on a belief, because our beliefs and our emotions are sort of combined. So in order to release a belief, you've got to release the emotion attached to it, which keeps it in place. So it just becomes, that belief just becomes just a statement rather than anything you've got any sort of strong feeling about. So there's that. And then I also do parts work with people. It's like our in our psyche, we're many different people. I think we all know that. So we can look at ourselves in terms of parts. So whenever we've got something, I mean, like for example, like at the beginning, you're saying, sometimes you have difficulty speaking. So you could speak to the part that has difficulty speaking, for example, or it could be something like the part of you that's the mother, or, it could be more like a more archetypal part. And you can work with those parts to find out why they were formed, where they're stuck, and what they are evolving into. You can do that sort of work. So there's a range of stuff that I do, both for myself and with my clients. But one of the wonderful things today is that we have so many tools and techniques available. I know a lot of people who use tapping, EFT.
Yes, yeah.
Quick self-help technique. I think it's good to have a range, a couple of techniques which are for self-help. And then maybe it's also good to do some work with a therapist or a coach at some time if you've got something that is really blocking your progress, like in relationships or your work or something like that.
Yeah. So it is about making that investment in yourself, isn't it? Yeah. Consistently throughout life.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because even though I mean, there are different views. I mean, there are views that many people, have a big spiritual awakening, and maybe you don't need to do so much work. I mean, in my experience from big spiritual awakenings, is sometimes you have that period of awakening when when you're very in touch with the oneness, and you're very open, and you down lots of insights, and in that state you feel full of wisdom and not in any way in touch with your wounds, and it can feel at that point, for however long it lasts, that you're awakened, or even that you're enlightened, or whatever. But in my experience, and I think a lot of other people's experience, eventually something will come along and will trigger something and put you back into whatever it is that has not yet healed. So I think it's a question of, we do the work until it's done, if it's ever done, because we live in an evolving universe. So the idea that it could be done when the whole universe itself is subject to change just says to me that surely as human beings, we're all operating at a unique vibration, and so is the earth. So if the earth, as many people say, is up leveling its vibration, that's going to demand that we do too. So we don't know really where it ends, do we? So
So I think we've gone around the world in this first episode.
Probably, yes, quite a lot for our first conversation.